Maybe we can start with our quick question, and folks, just while we're waiting, if you want to type in the chat just so we can get to know you a little bit and what you're most hoping to learn tonight, that would be fantastic. And also where you're zooming from if you feel comfortable sharing, that'd be great. That way we can kind of like tailor this workshop or focus on the aspects that you're most interested in. Be fantastic. Oh yeah, and if you're new to Zoom, that should probably be on the bottom of your screen, and there'll be like a little chat bubble, and so you can pop that up and type in there.
Yeah, I guess as people kind of start doing that, I'll just do a little bit of an intro to get things going. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on such a beautiful day. My name's Tess. I'm from Sustainable Kingston, and we run monthly or bi-monthly webinars. So make sure you check out our website for any upcoming events. Just so everyone knows, this will be recorded and posted online at a later time. But let's get things going. I'll just hand it over to Sarah and Stuart to begin.
Wonderful. Thanks everyone for sharing. We'll just open up our slideshow, and it's great to hear from those who are sharing.
Yeah, and welcome. We're really excited to have you with us tonight.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much, Sustainable Kingston, for hosting us. We're really honored to be here and really grateful for this opportunity. So welcome to the Urban Agriculture on a Budget, making your yard a food producing paradise. So we're going to be running this webinar tonight from 7 until 8 p.m. So if you need to duck out early, that's okay. As Tess mentioned, this will be recorded and we'll be sharing it with you online. So you can always catch up with us later. And before we begin, we do want to acknowledge the territory that we are situated on this evening. So we're here located on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory, and we're grateful to be able to live, work, and play in this beautiful place. But we also need to acknowledge the colonial past that this land has. So we're grateful to be here and also recognize that. And that brings us to us. So we are Sarah and Stuart. We're the co-founders of Modern Locavore, and between us, we have a number of years gardening and growing things in all sorts of spaces, whether it be outdoors or indoors, and in small spaces and bigger spaces. And you know, we're by no means master gardeners by any stretch, but we have some experience, and we're really grateful to be able to pass some of that on to you this evening. And as some of you have done already, you're letting us know in the chat where you're from and what you're most excited to learn about today. And we will have some time at the end to ask questions if you have follow-up, but Stuart will go into that a little bit more shortly.
All right, thanks so much, Sarah, for the introductions. That was lovely. So I'll give a bit of background about our organization to start with. Sarah and I are the founders, and we started this not-for-profit in 2020 with a mission to connect people with local food to build healthier and more sustainable communities. Our website is modernlocavore.ca, and we run a local food directory. It has a lot of local food producers like farms and that sort of thing, processors that make cheese and roast coffee and bake bread and that sort of thing, lots of local food organizations, community gardens. If you don't have your own garden space, there's a whole lot of stuff in there, so it's definitely worth checking out. We also post about local food related events like today's event, but also things like seed exchanges, stuff like that. And we try to post all of the volunteer and work opportunities that we can find out about if you're looking to volunteer or work somewhere. And we also produce our own educational resources, so articles and things like this. And you can also find us on social media, where we try to post as often as we can, primarily Instagram and Facebook, but we also have a Twitter and a YouTube channel. So tonight, we're going to talk a bit about the importance of urban agriculture, why we're here talking about it, and we'll go through our community project that we did last year with our friends Jess and Thomas, who live in the west end of Kingston. They have a beautiful house and yard, and we turned that into a great food producing and pollinator friendly garden. We'll go through the steps of transforming your own lawn with a few examples from that project. We'll give you some key takeaways, things to really bear in mind when you're doing your own project. Go through some resources to help guide you on your way, and go through some ways to connect with us and support us if you so choose to. We'll do a quick thanks to our sponsors, and then we'll take any questions that you might have. All right, so why is urban agriculture important? Why are we here talking about it tonight? Well, first of all, it's fun. That's the last point, but it really is a lot of fun. First, it builds a lot of resilience and independence in the community. You don't have as much reliance on imported food or food coming from abroad. So that's really good for the community. You get to choose how your food is grown. So you get to choose the method being organic or whatever method you choose. It turns idle land into productive land, not to say that all urban space is idle or anything like that, but often there's a corner of your yard or apartment that you could turn into a food growing area. It really demonstrates the value of food. It's certainly not easy to produce food. So when you do it yourself, it really shows you the value of it, and you're less prone to waste it, and you have a greater connection with your food and nature and people around you. It reduces the spread of agricultural lands to wild areas, so we don't have to chop down forests to build new agricultural lands. And it produces a habitat for beneficial species, especially in the way that we like to promote, sprinkling some nice pollinator flowers in there and making a bit of a habitat for insects and birds and stuff like that. And lastly, it's probably the most nutritious food you can get when you pick something fresh off the vine or off the plant. It's about as nutritious as it gets, and it's super tasty and super affordable. And like I mentioned, it's a lot of fun, and if you're doing it outside especially, it's great exercise.
All right, so as Stuart mentioned above, we had the opportunity to partner with our dear friends Jess and Thomas last summer, and we did a community project with them and worked with them to help transform their yard. And so that's a picture of them with their garden, or their before their big garden came in. And they really wanted to create a space that had food production, but also was a really wonderful place for native pollinators to be. So that's them. And what that ended up looking like is this picture here on the right. So there's the before and the after shot, and that was in one season. So within a few months, we took this beautiful space and created it into a very productive, beautiful space. And you can reach out to Jess and Thomas. They're really open to hearing from people, and you can reach them on Instagram at Buddy P Farm. And they're really excited to share what they're learning and are open to answering any questions you might have about some of their methods or some of the things that they're doing. And I think they're here tonight. So hey, Jess and Thomas. Yeah, so check them out. They're awesome, and they've really hit the ground running. They've had a lot of passion, and we're really open to doing things in a different way. And we're going to be touching on some of the aspects of their project tonight in this presentation, but we'll also go over some of the other methods that you can use depending on where you're at with your budget and what you're interested in doing in your space. So this is just one example that's been done locally in Kingston, and I think it's really inspiring. And I'm so excited to see all the work that they've done and that they're continuing to do. So keep up the great work, guys.
Great, so we're going to start with just an overview of the workflow that we envision when you're undertaking a project of your own. So this is kind of seasonal in nature. So you could envision kind of starting in late winter, early spring, and then following this process through to late fall, early winter. But also you can have microcycles of this. So as you make smaller improvements to your garden, you can kind of go through this cycle as well, minus some of the more specific items, but it definitely holds true. So you'll start by wanting to do an evaluation of what you have, dream up and design what you want. research and make plans for how to get there. You'll want to source your materials. If you're doing an outdoor garden and your method necessitates it, you'll need to potentially kill the grass so it doesn't interfere with your new garden. You'll want to build and fill raised beds. Again, that's an option, but we'll also go through container gardening and briefly talk about indoor gardening and that sort of thing. Next you'll want to plant once you have your beds ready. And then it's a matter of taking care of your garden, tending it, sharing, and enjoying it. And as you go through this process, we encourage you to reflect at every step and just think about what you could tweak, what you want to do differently, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and remembering too that, you know, any process like this, or anytime you're going to be working on transforming your yard or working on your garden, as many of you probably know from being people that have gardens already, potentially, you know, it's always a work in progress. So there's always an opportunity to reflect and change things and improve as you go. So this is meant to be something kind of what we used to guide our process last year when we worked on our community project with Jess and Thomas, was just kind of like the, you know, how it worked out in the cycle. But we just wanted to share this in case it's helpful for you in planning a bigger project of your own.
Mm-hmm. Right, so first up, you'll want to evaluate what you have, what you want, what you need, that sort of thing. So first of all, what skills and equipment do you have access to? So that's going to be a big determining factor in what you're able to do. So, you know, do you have how much time do you have? What skills are you able to provide? What's your budget? So it's really going to be a trade-off between time and budget a lot of the time. So if you have a lower budget, you might need to put in a bit more time. If you have a higher budget, you might need to put in a bit less time. You might be able to hire people to do some of the work, or you might be able to source kind of pre-made things or more refined materials, that sort of thing. And that will kind of dictate how large of a project you're able to take on as well. So how much time you have will impact that. And you also want to consider what's already in place. So take a good walk around your garden or your indoor space if you're gardening indoors, and take an inventory of what's already there that you like, what you don't like, that sort of thing. And importantly, especially if you're outdoors, is where's the sun and where's the shade? And that's not going to be consistent throughout the year. You know, in the early spring, we don't have our leaves yet. So you have to kind of see where the trajectory of the sun is going to be and plan accordingly. The sun is a bit higher in the sky in the summer. And likewise, indoors, you'll want to find your sunniest window, and that's going to be your gardening spot.
Yeah, for sure. And also just wanted to mention too, if you do have trees in your yard, being mindful of where they are and where their roots might be, because that's one thing that sometimes folks forget about, is just taking those in consideration too, so that the trees can continue to live and thrive for the years to
yes,
come.
That's a great point.
All right, so once you've had a good think about, you know, evaluating what you've got and what you've got to work with, then you get to go into dreaming and designing, which you're probably already doing if you're here. So, you know, just kind of putting reality aside for a second and just going, okay, what do I really want to include? What are the most important elements? You know, what do you want that space to look like? And kind of just locking yourself into this wonderful dream world of what your space might look like. You know, what would go where? And then also importantly, in terms of designing, like where are your lot lines? And this is one thing that often people don't think of, and one thing that was really brought to our attention with Jess and Thomas. As you can see on the side here, there's their lawn before and then afterwards. And when we were working with them, we were quite surprised at how large the road allowance was. It was almost half of their front yard. So just being aware of, you know, where your lot line ends and where your utility lines are. So you can call, and we'll go in that in the resources a little bit later, but about how to figure those things out, just to make sure that you're aware, you know, if work needs to be done in the road allowance, that might get dug up. So just being mindful of that and making sure you're not putting too many resources or plants there in case it needs to be dug up for maintenance. It could be really disappointing. So taking that into consideration in your design is super important, and also really important for maintaining good relationships with your neighbors. Also being mindful of how large your space is, or how much of a space do you want to convert? Do you want to start with something smaller? Do you want to do a larger space? You know, getting those measurements down so you can figure out how large you want your beds to be, etc. And then also thinking about what you want your space to look like during the year. especially right now, looking outside, gardens aren't always at their peak in the spring. So thinking about, do you want some green shrubbery that is going to look really fabulous year round, and maybe making that at the front of your yard or somewhere where you can see it to make that space more aesthetically pleasing. So at this stage, it's going to be about dreaming it up and using tools so that you can look at it like the one in the bottom. You can see here this lovely design that Jess has made to show us kind of what she was hoping to do. But you can also sketch it up with a piece of paper and just show, what you want to go where and what it's gonna look like, so you can kind of imagine it in the actual physical space. Oh, it's me too. All right, and then from there, so once you've got an idea, what skills you've got, what you want that space to look like, then it's good to kind of jump back into full in reality mode. And this is kind of something that's really important that people don't often think about. If you've got a set budget, especially, just figure out where you're going to get your supplies from and how much they're going to cost, because that sometimes sneaks up, especially this year. Lumber is double the price as it was last year. It's crazy expensive. It just blows my mind. But trying to figure out, okay, if this is my budget and I want to work with this budget, where can I get my supplies from? We're going to go over some resources later, some places where you can get supplies on a budget, and those should help out a lot. But just kind of doing some research so that you're not caught off guard and you get into a huge project and then suddenly you're in way over your head and it's really expensive. So I highly recommend doing some research in advance and also figuring out if you're going to need help from outside your household. So if there's something, for example, if you're not comfortable with power tools, is there anyone in your circle or your network that you could reach out to and say, hey, can you teach me how? Or hey, would you be able to help me out with this? Or hey, can I trade you some produce that I'm going to grow this year for your assistance, or something like that. And so that you have everything lined up so you can hit the ground running and make sure, I'm feeling really confident. I've got the money, I've got the resources, I've got the assistance, everything's all lined up, and I can really take on this project full-heartedly. And then from there, coming up with a work plan. So it's often good to work backwards and go, okay, I know I want to have everything in the ground by this date. What do I need to do building up to that time period? So coming up with a timeline, the different tasks you're going to need to achieve, who's going to do what if there's more than one person involved, and then other important details. So like, okay, this is when that order is coming, or this is when I need to order my plants by, or I need to have, this is when I need to pick things up, or when when I need to have the soil delivered, and just kind of getting everything lined up so you can have it on a calendar, and so that everything is going to get done in time. I'm not going to be sitting there with no garden bed and suddenly my plants are here. So it's good to be organized so that everything is kind of effortless. And something I feel really strongly about, because it can get really busy, especially if you're doing a big project.
All right, now that we have our plan in place, it's time to take action. So we'll want to figure out what tools you need for the project. And I'll come back to that a bit because it can widely vary depending on what you're aiming to do. If you do decide that you need to kill some grass, then cardboard and contractor's paper are really the best items for the job. Cardboard can often be found for free. Contractor's paper can often be found at any hardware store or big box store and isn't terribly expensive. It's just like craft paper. You might want some wood or lumber if you want to make some raised beds. Like Sarah mentioned, wood is quite expensive this year, so pallets are often a free or inexpensive option, and take a bit more time to work with because you have to take them apart first, but it is definitely doable. Jess and Thomas used them with great results in their garden. They might not hold up quite as well as a cedar would or something like that, but they certainly work well. It's important to make sure that they are heat treated pallets. That's very important to stress. So if you see the photo in the bottom right hand corner, that's a stamp saying that it is heat treated. Note the HT. If you don't see HT or you're not sure that it's the right HT or something like that, just steer clear. Better safe than sorry. There can be some toxic chemicals in there. You might want some wood chips for your garden, especially if you're killing the grass. That kind of goes hand in hand with cardboard and contractor's paper, or can make for some nice pathways between in-ground beds, that sort of thing. You might need some soil. We'll let you know where you can get that from later. Seedlings, plants, again, we can let you know where you can find those locally. You might want some rocks, bricks, stones, that sort of thing. If you're making borders, I mean, there are lots of options for garden bed borders, but those are some that we quite like. And you might also need some containers if you're doing a container garden or growing indoors. That would be like pots and that sort of thing. Could even be yogurt containers or glass jars, whatever you're able to find, really. And like I mentioned, tools, I mean, it can range from nothing to a whole lot. So you can do a lot with nothing. Like I mentioned, if you have a yogurt container, you can grow some lettuce in there or something like that. But typically a shovel is a good idea, or a trowel. You might want some garden gloves. If you're working with wood, then saws, maybe drills, hammers, that sort of thing. So you know, you'll kind of have to feel it out as you go, depending on what your goals are. But rest assured that you don't need much to get going.
I'm just going to add a couple of things. So in terms of the contractor's paper, it's actually a fair bit thicker than the craft paper, and you can get it at places like Home Depot. It's normally about 20 bucks a roll. And it is a little bit thicker. And the goal with that is that you want to be able to smother the grass and keep it down once you put wood chips on it. But we're going to go into that in a bit. I can't remember what the other thing was, so it must not have been important. But yeah, I just want to let you know, don't use craft paper. It might be a little bit too thin. But the other stuff is actually pretty affordable. It's a lot more convenient to use as opposed to cardboard. But just make sure it's 100% paper when you're using it.
Yes, thank you so much for clarifying. I meant to say it really looks like craft paper, but yes, it is definitely distinct from craft paper.
Yeah, it's like the stuff, you know, if you're ever doing work inside your house and you want to keep the floor safe, it's like the brown paper roll that rolls out. It's amazing.
All right, next up, once you have gathered some materials, you might want to start your seeds early before the growing season. So here we have our nice little tomato plants just getting going. We started those about a week or so ago, but now is a perfect time to get started for tomato and peppers and other heat-loving plants. So what do you need? You'll need some little pots, some soil, some seeds, and a warm and sunny spot. Seeds love to start in a damp and warm area. We have little peat pots here, but you can pretty well use anything that will hold soil. Yogurt containers. You don't want it to be too big, but nice little containers will do. If you don't have a bright window, you might want some additional lighting. Typically, this would be a fluorescent or LED light, and you usually want the cooler spectrum of light, which is good for leaves and that sort of thing, but not as good for flowering. So there's a cooler and warmer spectrum. Warmer is a little more red in tone. So you want like something closer to the blue spectrum. You'll also want to read your seed packets for whatever you're growing from seed. Typically, there are lots of instructions on there for when you need to start them and what sort of conditions they like and when to put them outside, that sort of thing. Also, the internet has lots of resources. You can just do a Google search for whatever you're growing, and because every plant has a different needs, and it's especially helpful if you just get seeds from a friend without a packet or something like that.
Yeah, that's very true. Or even sometimes at a seed swap, or if you went to Seedy Saturday recently, I'm sure the people there were helpful, but sometimes you get random things, you don't exactly know what to do with them. So. Right. I was opening the chat to see if anyone had added anything. All right. All right. So that brings me to, one of my favorite parts. I love scooping wood chips. It's one of my favorite things to do. But if you are planning on doing something where you want to remove the grass from your property, one thing you can do is you can recycle or repurpose that grass, which means you need to really, basically kill it off. And one way you can do that, ideally, it's great if you can start in the fall, because then you can get a jump start on that decomposition process over the wintering months. But if you're starting now, that's cool too. Just keep in mind that you might not be able to plant directly into that in the next month or so. But one thing you can do is you can lay down either your contractor's paper or your cardboard, and you want to make sure it's all overlapping. You don't want to have any gaps whatsoever, because if so, the grass can get through and it can spoil your plans. And so what you'll want to do is get that contractor's paper down, or the cardboard boxes, making sure all the tape and the staples and the stickers and stuff like that, you don't want any gross plastics in your garden. You want to have those all overlapping, and then you'll want to soak it really well with water. And that just basically helps to soften it up so the decomposition process can start a little faster and the worms can start getting in there and eating all of it and breaking it down. And then you'll want to put, 4 to 6 inches of wood chips on top. And that's something you can do if you're doing pathways in between your garden beds, or if you just want to kind of start working towards having an area, like let's say you don't want grass and you want to put something like red clover or a really cool alternative greenery option in your grass that you don't have to cut. That can be a way to do it, and it will break down over the years to come. So that's one tool you can put in your toolbox that's really affordable, really fun, and really easy. Like Stuart mentioned, you can get wood chips for free, and you can get cardboard boxes for free. So this is one just really great tool if you're looking to do a larger conversion process that we really recommend. And again, soak that cardboard before you add the wood chips if you can. You have anything to add?
No, I guess, yeah, you only really have to do this where you plan to plant. So you don't have to do an entire area, just where you want to put plants in the ground, really. So you can choose a smaller area for your garden bed if you like.
Cool. All right. So yeah, so another thing you'll want to do is, if you're going to be doing garden beds, you'll want to choose what kind of beds you want to do. As we mentioned earlier, lumber is really expensive this year, so pallets might be a great option. So you can see here, we've got some pallet beds at Peabody Farm now, and so those are beds made with pallets. You can also do in-ground beds. So as you can see on the bottom here, that is our backyard, and so we dug it out. Lumber is just expensive, and sometimes if you're renting a space, or if you don't know how long you're going to be there, or if just your budget doesn't allow it, digging out the ground is an option as well, like doing a bedding in the ground. So removing that sod, it does take a little bit of effort, but it can be a great option. You can also use other materials to use to make raised beds. So you can use wood, as we mentioned. You can also use bricks or stones. Also, sometimes you can get metal containers, things like that, just to keep the soil in space. So you don't have to run out and buy super expensive lumber, especially if this is your first time gardening and you don't know if you're going to like it. There's lots of creative solutions that you can use. Also, container gardening is a great option, especially if, let's say, you're living in a rental space, or if you have a balcony or a deck or something like that, and you're not able to go into the ground. You can get containers, and they work really well. You can grow a lot of things like herbs and lettuces and kale and tomatoes, especially baby tomatoes work really well, or like little cherry tomatoes work really well in container gardens. And they can be a great option for folks, especially if you're not able to use the ground like we mentioned. Also raised beds are great if you are worried about, like, let's say you just moved somewhere, you're not sure if they've used chemicals on the lawn, or if you have concerns over the soil quality or contaminants, or if you have accessibility needs. Or if you just really don't like weeding, a raised bed can be a really great way of avoiding that. So you're starting with fresh soil. You're not going to be, near the ground, so you don't have to worry about weeds coming in. So those are just some things to think about and reflect on. What's really important to you. Do you have time to do a little bit of extra weeding, or do not? Right. So those are some things to think about. Also, if you are doing raised beds, it's really ideal if you can put contractor's paper or cardboard underneath at the very bottom of your bed and make sure it's overlapping before you add your soil. Often you'll want those raised beds to be a foot or two off the ground. So just keep that in mind. That way the grass doesn't grow up and in through your beds. Just another thing that's going to save you time and effort weeding, especially if you go through the hassle of making or buying raised beds. It'll just make sure that you enjoy them a little bit more. All right. I'm just going to close the chat. I was trying to see if there's any other comments, but it was a little distracting. All right. Oh yeah, and so here's a little video of Stuart and I this weekend, so you can be aware of what it looks like to put in some in-ground garden beds. All right, so you can see here we're shoveling it out. All we're using is shovels, and you just dig down enough to get the roots out of the grass, and I like to shake it off to make sure I get as much as that soil back. You can use the leftover to compost and bring the nutrients back into your yard at a later date. And like I said, this is a great method that you can use. What we're planning on doing with this space is digging it out, letting it sit for a few weeks, making sure we get any of the grass that's remaining so that we don't have to weed as much. And then we're going to bring in a layer of soil, maybe 4 or 6 inches. And then we'll think maybe if we want to do stone border or something like that, but it's a super easy way of putting garden beds in. A lot of organic market gardeners even use this method just because it's a lot easier and they don't have to worry about the beds, and it's really, really a cost-effective option.
And just for reference, that was probably a 4 or 5 by 30 foot bed. And it took the two of us, 2 to 3 hours to dig out, and then another couple of hours to move the sod to its new home. We actually replanted it elsewhere in the garden, but you could also compost it if you want.
Yeah, and if you're careful with how you chunk it out and you have an area that you want to add grass to, it's a great way. If you put it down, you can step on it and then water it in and water it carefully for the next couple weeks. That's a way of creating new grass for yourself should you wish to do that. And yeah, it took us 2 hours. We timed it. I think it was like just under 2 hours, and then we took some time moving it around like Stuart mentioned, but it's not too bad. Like, it was actually really fun and it's not that hard. The one thing I do recommend though is do it when your soil is damp. Last summer I was working on a project and it was in the middle of a heat wave and there was a drought, and I was trying to take out some grass and it hadn't been watered previously, and it was like impossible. So if you're going to be doing it, now is great because the ground's not frozen, we're not in a drought, it's not in a heat wave, and if you start early in the morning, it doesn't suck as bad. So if you can get started early before it gets hot, best time. And if you are in the middle of a heat wave, or if the grass starts getting dry or the ground starts getting dry, you can water it a bit the day before and the day of, and that just makes it a little bit easier to break up. So pro tip on that one.
All right, so now that your beds are all prepped, you can plant. Typically, people would consider our last frost date around May 24th or end of May. And that's when you can really start planting whatever you like. There are a few things that you could plant a little earlier than that if they're hardy, maybe some shrubs or perennials or that sort of thing. But in general, if you're planting young vegetable plants, late May is a good time to start. But check your weather, make sure it doesn't get too cold overnight. Consider cold frames or greenhouse if you want to extend the season. A cold frame is really just a small portable greenhouse that is temporarily in place, and then once the plants kind of reach the height of the cold frame, you pop it off and on they go. But this just allows you to start a little earlier and end a little later in the season when frost would normally kill your plants, but it's a little warmer inside the cold frame or the greenhouse. And also consider rotational planting. So something like a tomato, you would only plant once. You plant it at the beginning of the year, and then it grows throughout the year, and then you harvest later in the year. But other things like lettuce, it's really nice to have 2 or 3 plantings of those throughout the year. So you plant lettuce early, and then it grows, and you get a nice big plant, and you harvest it maybe once or twice. But then a couple of weeks later, you put in your next lettuce so that it's ready to go when that prior lettuce has already been eaten or is maybe dying at that point or something else. And also lettuce, as an example, does better in the cold weather. So you might do a planting early in the year and then do a planting later in the year, so you don't have lettuce that's really struggling throughout a hot summer or something like that. And depending on what you want to plant, you can just do a little bit of research and figure out, is this something I plant once, or maybe I want to plant it a couple of times throughout the year.
Yeah, and that will also save you from having like 30 lettuce plants all at once. There's only so much green leaf lettuce that one could eat, as you've probably noticed if you've ever had a CSA share. It's good to kind of budget your vegetables as the summer goes on, rather than just having a big, big basket of lettuce all at once, because it's hard to preserve, especially the lettuce.
Yes.
Also, lessons hard learned.
All right, so a bit of a promotional moment, but if you've been watching any of this and you say, whoa, that looks like a lot of work. Well, our sponsors, UGrow, are happy to help you out if you want some hassle-free raised beds and a vegetable garden. They're local, they're small scale, and they specialize in the installation of high-quality raised beds. And you can choose what assortment of vegetables or herbs you want them to plant in your garden for you. And they'll coach you on how to maintain it and how to harvest properly. And we think they're a really great business. So if you have the budget for it, definitely worth checking them out, ugrow.ca. So once you've had a bit of success growing your garden and starting your garden, all you really need to do is tend to it, water it, and based on what your plants need, and hopefully you have a bountiful harvest, and you can share it with your friends, your neighbors, your family, and also awesome organizations like Loving Spoonful. It'll go to people who need and deserve it in the community. And they really thank you for it. And you can see Jess and Thomas there, Buddy Pea Farms. They have a beautiful bowl of radishes that they're about to donate, and made them feel really good. And Loving Spoonful was really happy, and whoever got those vegetables definitely enjoyed them.
Yeah, and I will say too, I used to work for a not-for-profit that was on the receiving end. I worked with youth in supportive housing, and we received a donation of Loving Spoonful of vegetables every week. And it was such an amazing opportunity because every week the youth and I would cook meals together. And it was so amazing having like delicious local organic vegetables, and it really made a difference for them, and it really made a difference in our house. And they loved it. It was a great learning opportunity. We'd get all these really unique vegetables, and they'd be like, how do you use this? And we'd learn how to cook it together. And it's just such an amazing opportunity. And so those donations are really valued, and they do a lot of good for our community. So I know firsthand from experiencing that, and yeah, it's amazing. So if you have a chance, check them out. Loving Spoonful is great, and they do amazing work in our community.
And sorry, I realized we glossed over the tending portion a little bit, but yeah, tending to your vegetables or plants is pretty easy actually. Conventionally you would think of giving them about 1 inch of water per week, and that can usually be 2 or 3 waterings. So you don't need to go crazy and water them every single day. They can dry out a little bit. I mean, when they're really young and small, you can water them a little more frequently and be more gentle with them, but they're fairly hardy unless you have a major hot, dry heat wave or something like that. And you'll want to do a little bit of weeding. If you keep up with it, it's less of a task. Small weeds come out easy, and yeah, just have fun with it.
Yeah, and another thing too to keep in mind, if you are planting into the ground, like if you're doing in-ground beds, you'll need to water less frequently because they'll have access to the groundwater that's there. If you're using raised beds, you may need to water a little bit more frequently, but again, if you allow your plants to learn how to be thirsty, their roots will grow further looking for water, right? They're gonna have a stronger, hardier root system, and the plant will become more resistant. But if you kill them with water, you give them too much water, or spoil them with water, I should say, they won't build those deep root systems, and they won't be as resilient. So I know it's really hard. I would have a hard time, maybe not giving them too much water, but keep that in mind that you are doing them a service by not giving them too much love or too much water. You can give them all the love you want, but you don't need to give them too much water.
Right. Oh, and last tidbit, not to overwhelm anybody, but it can also depend a little bit on the type of soil you have. We have some pretty darn heavy clay soil in our backyard, and it would really hold on to the water, whereas a sandier or loamier soil would, it passes through a little more easily, so it would drain off, and you might need to give it a touch more water than a clay soil.
That's a really great point. The other thing I wanted to mention too is if you do want deeper beds, like 2 foot deep beds that are raised, you can also put stuff like large sticks or large branches in the bottom, and those will decompose over time. Just if you are, let's say, short on soil or something like that, or don't want to spend the money on soil and you have a bunch of leftover logs or branches in your yard, you can use that, and that can be a really great cost saving method as well. So just wanted to mention that because I forgot. Anything else? It's our catch-up slide.
Yes.
All right.
Well said.
All right, so a couple other considerations that some people forget about and might not think about, especially if you're going over your budget, so we want to make sure we mention it now, are things like compost. Or just things in your planning. If you're designing your space, okay, where's the compost gonna go? And that's really important because not only does it give you a space to put, leftover like, plants at the end of the season and vegetable scraps and stuff like that, it's also really great because it's going to break down over time. And then next year, or even this year, if it breaks down quickly, you're going to be able to add that back to your garden, and it's going to be a free source of nutrients. You may not have to stock your soil as much next year because you're going to have all this free nutrients to, revitalize your soil every year. So that's one thing we really recommend. And you can get compost bins online, or you can make your own out of wood. You can schlep one together with some pallets. There's lots of different options for people on different budgets. So that's super important. And you can also, rainwater collection is super important as well. Water, is a valuable resource. And so you can get some rain barrels set up, and that way you can use the water that comes off your roof, which is free, and you don't need to worry about having to pay as much for your water bill. And then you can use that wonderful water that comes right out of the sky at your convenience. So that's another thing to think about, and another thing to factor into your budget. Another thing with rainwater is rain garden. So Buddy P Farm was really stoked to put in a rain garden on their property, and they did a really wonderful job designing it, as you can see here in the bottom right hand corner. So just using the downspout water that comes off, and you can use rocks and water loving plants and lower depths to dig into your yard a little bit, so that all that water can be funneled and channeled into those plants so they can live and thrive in those spaces. And that also stops the water from running off and going onto the street. So I don't know if anyone noticed this over the winter this year, but I noticed it this year especially. I don't know if it was COVID or what, but we'd be walking around in our neighborhood and all the downspouts point towards the sidewalk or the street, and there'd be all this ice, So things like that will also help the water stay within your yard and keep sidewalks safer, as well as give those plants a lovely place to live. Another cost saving method that I just thought of now, and one thing that we did in our community project last year was, and it may sound intuitive, but especially if you're buying plants for pollinators, if you buy smaller plants, they start off small, but eventually over time they get larger, and they're also like half the price. So if you can be patient and wait for them to grow, that's another great cost savings method that you can add.
Yeah, and they do grow really fast. If you look at that photo in the bottom right corner, that's from early in the year, and they're relatively small plants, but by the end of the year, that area looked really full and lush with those plants. So
yeah, so they do
fast.
They do grow quickly, and we'll also go over, there's some more resources we have, but I just wanted to mention that in case I forget later. And another consideration you'll want to think about is animal or insect friendly features. So having things like a bird bath, or there's also like bee watering holes. So having like a bowl of water with some rocks or marble so that, insects can land and not drown in the water. So things like that, as well as having native pollinator plants can be really, really helpful and beneficial to your garden, because not only do they attract pollinators to your space to pollinate all your vegetable and fruit plants, but it's also like just really a lovely thing to do, and it really beautifies the space as well.
Mm-hmm. And you can have lots of fun with it. You can get a bat box or a native bee house, or make some yourself, or there are tons of things that you can do that are really nice to look at, and really good for animal and insect friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I wanted to mention as well is, as tempting as it is to have like a picture perfect garden, is allowing to have some like wild spaces in your yard too, right? Like having some spaces, because pollinator species often need those places to overwinter, or to lay their larvae, or to bury underground. So they need different habitats. So if you're always cleaning up and tidying up, they may not have as many spaces to live. So it can also be really important to have some wild spaces in your yard as well, so they can live there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so a couple of key takeaways that we learned in doing this project, but also thought it'd be beneficial to share with you folks tonight, is have a plan, but also don't be afraid to start. It's not going to be perfect. It might be a little bit messy. Things may not go according to plan, but don't be afraid to start, like even if it's starting small, like just, do like one garden bed or a couple of containers, and just, get a feel for it, see if you enjoy it, and just get a shot at it. Also, another thing is, life always finds a way. Plants want to grow. If you give them some water and some sunlight and some good soil, those seeds are going to want to grow. And if they don't, it might have been a bad batch of seeds, so don't worry, no one's perfect at everything. There's even organic farmers That's sometimes year to year, like last year, for example, we had a really bad year for potatoes. So don't beat yourself up if things don't work out perfectly, but just, give it a shot and do your best, and don't worry if you make a mistake. It's constantly a work in progress, and constantly like an experience where you can learn and grow from year to year, because the seasons will be different, the temperatures will be different, the conditions might be different. You might have like a squirrel problem or a rabbit problem you need to work out. I remember a couple of years ago, we were living somewhere, and I think we planted kale like 4 or 5 times because the rabbits kept coming and eating it all. And I would be heartbroken. And then Stuart would go out and buy, we do more kale, and they just kept eating it. So things like that happen, right? Or you might want to learn how to deal with different pests or things like that. So yeah, don't feel discouraged if things don't always work out 100%. All right, another important lesson is call before you dig. So we're going to go into that in the resources, but make sure you know where your utility lines are, so you don't start digging and hit a gas line or a water line or something like that. Would be really unfortunate. And also, like I mentioned earlier, be aware of where your lot lines are, so you can be mindful of that in your planning process. And last but not least, build community with your neighbors. So regardless of whether you're doing your front yard, your side yard, your backyard, it's a great opportunity to engage with the people in your community. We noticed even when we were working on the community project last year with Jess and Thomas, their neighbors were amazing. Like folks would come by and give suggestions on how to grow things, or say hello from the street, or say encouraging things. And it's a really great opportunity to build community and build relationships, and work towards interdependence in your neighborhood, and really like build that community piece, especially these days that we're really missing with COVID. So yeah, do reach out and engage with folks in your community.
Yeah, it's a lot more interesting to talk about than a swath of grass.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how often do you water this grass?
Yeah.
So green. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to actually inform and teach other people too, because we can all learn from each other. And yeah, it's lots to chat about for sure. Oh, this is me too.
That's you too.
All right, so some resources. So as I mentioned before, there's the call before you dig. So that's Ontario One Call. And you'll want to give them about a 5 business day heads up of when you want to they'll come and literally drive by and spray paint where the utility lines are. So we actually just had it done on our yard, so that we would be aware of where those things were. And they're great. You don't have to interact with anyone. You just call and they spray, and then it's all color coded so you can figure out what it is. And another useful tool that City of Kingston have is called the Planning and Development Map. And again, all these resources will be available for you in the show notes or wherever. We might make the slides available to you, and that way you can just click and go right there. But it's a really great interactive web map, and there's actually a measure tool, so you can see approximately how large your property is and how wide and whatnot. And you can also see where your approximate lot lines are, so you can know, okay, where's the road allowance, where does my yard start, where's the side yard. And you can use that as a great tool, and it's super helpful, and it's available for free as well. You can also use Google Maps. So if you go above, you can look at aerial view, and you can kind of see where things are, and you can take a screenshot, pull it into Paint or different tool,
Image editor.
Image editor, yeah, that's the word. He's the computer guy. And so you can use that to kind of mark it up, as we did earlier when you saw with the community project. So you can kind of paint around or print it out and draw on it. So you have something that's representative of the space. You can also do that with the development map as well. Also, a couple of great places to find free or affordable resources, which I've stumbled upon, or we've stumbled upon, and they've been great. So places like Facebook Marketplace, and there's also a lot of groups on Facebook. We'll just list a couple of them now because they took a while for us to find when we moved to Kingston. So there's Garden for Good YGK, which some of you are probably familiar with. That's run by Loving Spoonful, and they're awesome. You can often post there, and people are super excited to help, whether it be like advice or free stuff or things they're willing to lend you, which is great. There's also neighborhood groups. So regardless of what neighborhood you live in Kingston, you can sign up and kind of get to know your community that way virtually. And folks are often really willing to share. We used to live in McBurney Park, and people were always really excited to share. Oh, someone's underlying. That's
we
cool.
have an artist.
We have an artist, yeah, resident artist. apparently a big fan of Permaculture Kingston community. But yeah, there's also Kingston, Ontario Gardeners and Permaculture Kingston community. There's also, I can't remember what it's called, but there's like a free group specifically targeted at your neighborhood. So if you're in central Kingston, for example, there's like free groups specifically on Facebook. So check those out too. Also, Kijiji is a great resource. There's pages on there where you can find free stuff or things to give away. And you can also put up lists where you want stuff as well.
Yep.
And YouTube's also a great resource. There's so many educational resources, and even when we're watching dinner, we'll often be watching YouTube and trying to learn from other gardeners and just see different methods that they use and different things that inspire us to try new things. Internet research, which is pretty general, but also social media. A lot of people these days are sharing their resources or their experience on social media, so you can learn from other people kind of, you know, in your day-to-day life if those are forums you choose to engage with. Oh.
All right, so these are more along the lines of, Sarah's going to erase the yellow line.
Just so y'all can see. All right, we're good. Back in business.
All right, so so these are more along the lines of things that you'll need. So soil, we've had great luck with El Martin. Their garden center, they deliver for free in town, and they have a really great triple mix. It feels amazing. It's very nutritious. And you can figure out how much soil you might need using the Park Farms website. They have a calculator on there. You can plug in, oh, my bed is 10 feet by 4 feet, and it's 6 inches deep or something like that. Just plug in your numbers, and it'll tell you how many cubic yards you need, which is kind of like the going measurement for big quantities of soil. You can get free wood chips from just about any arborist because they typically have to pay to take them elsewhere. So Justin Thomas used Arbor Care Tree Service, and they were really great to work with, really considerate. And they're a local business. You can find lumber and wood at Glen Supply or Card Lumber. They're both local organizations. Might be a bit pricey this time of year just because of our current situation, but in general, they're fantastic. You can get local organic seeds from Kitchen Table Seed House. You can find them online at Terra Foods or Limestone Organic Creamery. And these seeds are really good because they're grown just over on Wolf Island. So they're acclimatized to our climate and our growing conditions, that sort of thing. Like we mentioned before, check out our directory. There's tons of stuff in there like Kitchen Table Seed House, and as well as places to find seedlings like Patchwork Gardens, Roots Down, Root Radical, Main Street Urban Farm, that sort of thing. And also check out the Habitat for Humanity Restore, and that's more for building materials. But they have lots of good used stuff that's been saved from the scrapyard. And you can also take your stuff there that you don't want anymore that other people might like as well. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, if you're doing renovations, they'll take donations. I'm not sure about right now, so you may want to call ahead, but they have great supplies. They're out on, I think, Gardner Road.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Super fun and great inspiration too. If you're doing a project, go there. I don't know if they're open right now because of lockdown, but it's a really great opportunity to get stuff on a budget for sure.
Yeah. And here's a closing photo of Buddy P Farm, Justin Thomas's garden project late last year. You can see it looks absolutely stunning. It's lush, productive, and beautiful. And they're making even more improvements this year. I mean, a garden project, is it ever really over? Probably not. So you can keep up with them on Instagram, check them out. We'll have the link to their Instagram page is earlier in this presentation, and we'll make that available. All right, we'd love for you to connect with us and let us know what you thought of the presentation. Get in touch, shoot us an email, info@modernlocavore.ca. Check out our website, tons of great resources. We go in depth on a bit more stuff that we talked about in this presentation, and we're going to be producing a lot more educational materials as well. Subscribe to our email newsletter, lots of cool stuff in there, and you can keep up with what's going on in Kingston regarding local food. And follow us on social media. We're most active on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Locavore. We don't post to Twitter that often, but if you like Twitter, hey, check us out anyways. And we do have some amazing sponsors that help keep our lights on, but please do consider donating to Modern Locavore so we can keep doing more of this and kind of expanding our reach in terms of educational material and that sort of thing. And a huge thank you to our sponsors. They really make this possible and keep our website and what we do going. We talked a bit about UGrow. They're amazing if you want to do a project like this. North Roast Coffee makes incredible coffee, organic and fair trade options as well, roasted same day that you pick, that you get a delivery most of the time. And huge thanks to Kingston Community Credit Union. We have our account there and they've been fantastic. They're just great people and we like to keep our money local, and it benefits the community as well through local business loans and mortgages and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and also North Roast Coffee does free delivery in town.
Yes.
So if you're wanting coffee, but you don't want to leave the house because it's crazy out there right now, call North Roast and they'll hook you up.
Yep. And they're super nice people.
Yeah, super nice people. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm realizing we're really close to time. I'm so sorry. I don't know where that 55 minutes went. I guess we started a wee bit late.
We're happy to stick around if you are.
Yeah, exactly. If you have any questions, thank you so much for your presence here tonight. We really appreciate you being here. And we're really grateful for this opportunity. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. If you have other follow-up questions, do reach out to us. We're happy to take any questions or comments. Also, if there's other content you want to see us creating, drop us a line. We really want to create things that people find useful and really would love to contribute to the local food system in our community. So any feedback you have for us, let us know. We're happy to hear from you at any time. All right, we're going to open the chat and see what we've got.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was wonderful closing remarks.
All right, I'm going to try to, I might stop the share so that we can see the chat better.
Yeah.
All right.
Good point, Doug, to bear in mind what kind of wood chips you're getting, because like you said, pine chips are a bit more acidic and could impact your garden.
Yeah, but are great for blueberries because they love acidic soil. Pine needles too. Anything free brings a risk, yes. So you can also call, when you call an arborist, you can ask them to bring like wood chips that have not been impacted by pests. So you can say, hey, do you have any trees that, let's say, are just too close to the hydro wire or something like that? And you can request things that haven't been affected by pests.
And yes, we did talk about a hugel culture briefly. It's a bit too big of a topic to get into tonight.
Thank you for the positive comments. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, angle lot.
Yeah, I assume that means there's a slope on there that you have to account for. So I guess there are a couple of options here. So you could build your bed in a way that's actually angled on the bottom, or you could dig out a flat spot, or you could support one end that's lower. So you could put some bricks down or something like that. And then maybe have something up against the bottom that seals it. Those are the options that I would think about, Courtney.
Yeah, there is one really great example at Barrie and what's that street? It's like just north of Skeleton Park. They did like it's called terrace gardening, and so they were doing experimental gardens. So if you're looking for inspiration, yeah, it's a really sweet place.
Patrick.
Yeah, Patrick and Barrie. So check that out. And also if you go on Google, you can look into terrace gardening, and there's lots of really great ideas of specific things, but using rocks. You can also use like iron bars and draw them into the ground, and then you can use that to like build up like walls along your space as well. But that's a great question. It depends how high of an angle. If you want to shoot us like a photo or something like that, at info@modernlocavore.ca, we're happy to give more suggestions.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a really cool project, and also like a really great thing to be doing, and making use of all those spaces. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that this will be going up on YouTube, I believe on both the Sustainable Kingston's channel and our channels. So if you want a recap of anything that happened tonight, it's going to be available for you. So no need to worry.
Yeah, any other questions? Oh. Our community garden will try this year for free wood chips at Get Chip for Garden. Do you want to do the scrolling? I'm not used to your laptop. Happy growing, yeah, and wish everyone a great season. And we hope to connect with you this coming year. I think there was some comments earlier. I'm just gonna maybe, I don't know if everyone has access to them. Oh, how close to a well or septic can you be, plant bushes or trees? That is a great question.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of experience with septic ourselves. That would probably be a question for someone who installs septic and maintains septic systems.
Yeah, I would check in with them about that. And also I would try to find out how deep those roots might be. But yeah, that's a really great question, and definitely call a specialist about stuff like that if you have questions or if you're worried about it, because that can cause big issues for sure. Oh, also hot tip, if anyone's curious, I know the city of Kingston right now has a tree program. So if you're looking for deciduous or coniferous trees, if you go onto the city website, they have, you can get discounted trees for in your yard. So not on city property, but in your yard. And they're going for $10 for like a coniferous tree, and then $17 for deciduous. And they have a whole bunch of different varieties. So if you're curious about that, feel free to shoot me an email. I've got a link for that as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And if we don't have any other final questions, we'll maybe close it there for tonight. But we really appreciate all your attention, and we wish you a very wonderful growing season.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It's been a lot of fun, and don't hesitate to reach out to us.